All right, one and all, we are looking at sectionalism in antebellum America. This is a combination of chapter 10 and 11. Some of this you already know. We've talked a little bit about here, there, and everywhere. But essentially, sectionalism is the differences within the United States based on where you live. And this is going to affect our politics, our economy, our social life. And when we talk about antebellum America, that's referring to before war. So obviously, looking at what America was like before the Civil War. You can imagine that this is going to include different types of people, diversity, what's happening and causing strife and maybe animosity within the United States. The time period that we're looking at here is 1820 to 1850, so right smack dab in the middle of the 1800s, where some significant change will be coming in. The first thing we're going to be looking at is how America is changing. So when I say the changing face of America, I'm actually referring to like literally and figuratively, right? So, post War of 1812, there's going to be a major push of immigration coming to the United States. And after War of 1812, we legitimized ourselves in the world. We had an actual standing in the world and offered opportunities that other nations just did not offer to people, in particular, those who are looking for some positive change and not only looking for change, but need change. So, what I mean by that is the population in the United States will significantly change because of this immigration. War of 1812, like I had mentioned, is over. So many people see this as like a place where they can come to find something new, something different that they don't necessarily have over in Europe. Europeans are going to leave for a lot of different reasons. Right now in the 1800s, so if you were learning about Europe in the 1800s, they refer to it as the age of revolution. There's revolutions happening socially, literally, politically, economically. There's just revolutions all across the board. And some of them are good and some of them are not. And Europe is a little bit of a hot mess right now. So there are people who are coming to the United States for reasons of opportunity, and some people who are coming because they have to. They don't really have a choice. So I want to examine that. And then also, many of these people are moving into the cities. So we're going to see a major shift within this time period of the wealth of the United States no longer being in the South, but moving to the cities because we have the stable labor force thanks to the immigration. And remember, right, there's no regulations on business. So the factory owners, business owners, they could pay their workers whatever they want. And if the workers don't like it, there's always other people willing to step in and take the job. So this allows for a really large change in the way in which our economy flows, but also our demographics. Many of the immigrants coming will come to the cities, especially on the East Coast, right? We're looking at New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, and they will remain there or at least around there for the job opportunities that the cities offer. So, looking at some of the early immigrants. So, when I say early immigrants, we're referring to immigrants that came before the Civil War, even like earlier than that, looking in the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s. And there will be multiple different groups coming. And the first set of groups, the people who are living in the United States are a little bit more accepting of than the other groups that we're going to be discussing. So after War of 1812, English, German, French immigrants are really going to increase. And many of these immigrants will come for what we refer to as pull factors. So when I say a pull factor, that's referring to a reason why people come. The United States is pulling people in because of the opportunity, the free enterprise system, the ability to succeed in ways that you don't see outside of the United States, right? People are coming for that, the resources, the trade, right? All of those economic it's enticing for people to come to the United States, especially the English, the German, the French. And the reason that I say that we're more accepting, a lot of it has to do with that Americans' ancestors really can be found from these three places. So you might have people that have already lived here. The majority of the people do speak English, but there's also a religious portion to it as well. The English, many of the Germans, and even some of the French match up with that Protestant ethic that the Americans that are already here identify with. But then when you have the Irish and even some of the Northern Europe, many of them were actually pushed out of Europe, meaning things are happening in their nations that are forcing them to leave. A great example would be the Irish potato famine. Potatoes, such an integral part of Irish Catholics. Not only were they able to make money by selling potatoes, but it really was how they survived themselves. Potatoes have this ridiculous amount of nutrients. And so the poor people of Ireland, the Catholics that were living in this semi-feudal system under the English, they were really surviving on potatoes. So when the famine hits and destroys the potato crop, they have nothing to eat. They're literally dying of starvation. So they're pushed out of Europe. They have to leave. And these people are just not as widely accepted. There's literally people in America waiting on the docks, ready to turn them around and put them back onto boats. There were actual fistfights that broke out on the docks when the Irish were coming off of the boats and into America. And a lot of it has to do with, well, the English and the Irish don't get along in the first place, but there is like a Protestant Catholic situation, right? The Irish were Catholic, the English are Protestant, both happen to be Christian, but that didn't matter to them at the time. And so there was a lot of that animosity that we know over in Europe deals with all the time is being brought over into America. Now, because of this influx of immigrants and some of the ones that we don't necessarily appreciate at the time, like the Catholics, there was a large push for people in the United States to limit. They talked about ending immigration. They were worried about the influence that it would have in politics. And so you could see this flag here. It says Native Americans, beware of foreign influence. This is kind of ironic because the term Native American, it doesn't read the way that we read it today. When I think of a Native American, I think of somebody who had lived here before the Europeans came, an indigenous group of people. And a Native American back in the 1800s actually referred to an American citizen whose family had been living in the United States from like the American Revolution to the War of 1812. If you were here from those time periods, right, before the War of 1812, you were considered to be a quote unquote Native American. So this is referring to people of the United States, white Americans whose families had been settled here before the War of 1812, being influenced by the immigrants. So they're saying like, beware of this foreign influence, right? Beware of their ability to vote and make change in politics and take jobs and yada, yada, yada. This philosophy is actually known as nativism. So a nativist or somebody who believes in nativism thinks that if you're a Native American, a quote unquote Native American, right? Anyone who could trace their heritage back to the War of 1812 or before deserves special treatment. So this is like a superiority thing, right? So if you are a nativist, right, you felt like you had the right, the ability to put down and oppress the immigrants coming. You deserve special treatment. They shouldn't be allowed to vote. They shouldn't be become American citizens, blah, 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 blah. So, and I know in class we kind of talked about like some of these sentiments that can still be seen or felt even today, right? Immigration is always such a hot button issue. So this was really like the start of those really aggressive sentiments. So much so that nativists started a secret society they referred to as the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner, which always makes me laugh. I don't know why. It just seems so ridiculous. And in this Order of the Star-Spangled Banner, they talked about how to infiltrate in politics to make sure that their influence is seen rather than the immigration influence infiltrates into politics. And so this becomes actually like a political party. And the political party is given a nickname because anytime anybody tried to find out what was happening in the Order of the Star Spangled Banner, if they were ever asked, like, what are you talking about? What are you doing? Yada, yada. The answer was always, I know nothing. I know nothing. It's like a fancy way, an old timey way of saying no comment, right? I know nothing. I know nothing. So they were given the nickname, the Know Nothings. And in time, we will actually have a know nothing president. So this nativist philosophy was pretty influential over politics. Now, talking about politics, we have a string of wet blankets of presidents post Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was large and in charge. He made an impression, and it almost was as if the American public just couldn't handle another person like that. So they put in these like drips. So let's talk about these fellows. So after Andrew Jackson, you have Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren was Jackson's VP in his second term. And Martin Van Buren is from New York. He's from Kinderhook, New York, but he had a lot of, he was swayed very easily, in particular by the southern states. John C. Calhoun was always like whispering in Martin Van Buren's ear, right? Like he was always very easily swayed by slave owning states in particular. So this did not sit well with the American public. He was very wishy-washy, did not do well. So the next president coming in was William Henry Harrison. Now, we remember William Henry Harrison from such battles as Tippecanoe and the Battle of the Thames when he was fighting Tecumseh, right? So this is an attempt to pull back that, we love American generals as presidents, right? So we've already seen that with Andrew Jackson, and we saw it with George Washington. So maybe William Henry Harrison is going to pull those days back for us. He is a Whig, right? So we're noticing, looking at the amount of times that people are in their terms and what political party they are. And so William Henry Harrison, unfortunately, when he was giving his inauguration speech, he spoke for about 4 hours on a cold March day in the rain. He contracted pneumonia and he died 32 days into office. So that was disappointing for everybody, including William Henry Harrison. And so now that leaves John Tyler, who was Harrison's VP. So he's the first person to be jumped into the presidency. And amazingly enough, he used to be a Democrat, switched to be a Whig in order to be with William Henry Harrison. Whigs didn't like him. They literally kicked him out of the political party. And he's referred to as the president without a party. And he served one term as well. So when we have such strong feelings about the social life in the United States with the immigrants and the changes that we're seeing, and then you couple that with these, I don't know, how would you describe them? I keep calling wet blankets, but I can't seem to find another term. I feel like that's the best thing I could do, right? They are just awful. And so how do you combat the issues that the Americans are dealing with when the presidents are just non-effectual? So it's not a good moment in time. And I had here, this is like a commercial. I'll share it for you about what's happening. Okay. From the Super Bowl about immigration, and we'll take a look at that another time. I'll just post it on School J. So the workforce is starting to change, right? So we saw that with the immigrants coming in, but it created a lot of divisions and tensions within America, within their own culture themselves, right? There's a lot of problems that were happening. And you also notice, and this is a very famous thing, right? Help wanted, no Irish need apply, right? So obviously there's aggressive feelings towards immigrants, even within the workforce. But in the North, we're starting to see some changes for women, whether for good or for bad. You can make the decision. And women are entering the workforce a little bit more. We saw with the Lowell mills, and those types of things are starting to increase within the United States. But factory work for women was really harsh and forgiving. And let's not forget that there was a lot of backlash from society for women going to work, right? Women were expected to be at home and raise children. So if they're working in the factory, that's not happening, right? So there was a lot of backlash, a lot of pushback from society, but it still was being, they were grinding down and going to the factories to work. Working in a factory is miserable, right? There's no windows, there's no regulations, there's no conditions. The first bell for the Lowell mills was at 4:30 in the morning. They got home at 6:30 at night. They had maybe one break for lunch. And this was 6 days a week. I mean, it's miserable, and you're making less than men would at a factory. So there was actually movements towards attempting to get unions for women in factories. So an example would be the Factory Girls Association or the Female Labor Reform, which attempted to get a 10-hour day. And I think about that, right? How they were working to get a 10-hour workday, which is longer than what we have today, right? But imagine what that would have been like for them if they're like fighting for a 10-hour workday. And there was pushback, right? Their unions are a very European thing. It's not something that we saw in the United States much at this time. It's really started coming into our own with unions. So there was actually a court case in Massachusetts called the Commonwealth versus Hunt. Commonwealth referring to Massachusetts, because they don't consider themselves a state. They're a commonwealth. Massachusetts. And so in this Commonwealth versus Hunt, it actually legalized unions. It was like, yeah, like unions are allowed. So allowed for the persistence of unions in the future, which then added towards reform in the future as well. Now, in the economy, though, right? So now we have more people working. We have immigrants coming in. The women are working in the north, right? So the economy is starting to change, and the distribution of wealth is starting to change as well. If I think of prior to this time period, if I wanted to find the wealthy Americans, where would I look? And your answer would be like Virginia in the South. That's starting to change. It's now being found in the cities. So if you've ever heard of like the wealthy 1%, and usually the wealthy 1% are always found in like pretty uppity places. Right now we're seeing it in the cities, like New York City. I mean, New York City is like really coming into its own, finding its way into the world of the social elite. And within New York City, or within the United States, I should say, the majority of wealth, so meaning within the amount of money that exists in the United States, the majority of it belongs to 5% or less of Americans in the mid 1800s. Now, we talk about today about the wealthy 1%, right? So this is we're heading towards that aspect of a capitalist society, right? There is a small amount of people who own a ton of cash. That's happening in America, in the cities, in New York City. So you start to see this like new urbane culture that pops up in New York City, right? Like Park Ave and walking through Central Park and Fifth Avenue and Easter parades and brunching on Sunday in the park and blah, 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 right? So there's this social elite that exists, becomes uber trendy to be living in New York City. And it starts to rival some of the more wealthy cities of the world. But at the same time, we also know in New York City, there's that other group of people that live there, like the poor and the people who are working in the factories, the urban poor. And that also includes free blacks. So even though you have people who maybe escaped slavery, got their freedom, came to the cities, right? They're also being treated just as poorly as the immigrants would, right? So it is a struggle for them as well. But fortunately, though, the middle class of America is starting to expand. Thanks to the growth of the cities, you have a little bit of urban sprawl starting to develop, like little suburbs popping up here, there, and everywhere. We didn't call them suburbs at the time, but that's kind of like what was happening. And you have these middle-class families that are starting to develop businesses thanks to the industry that's happening in the cities. So the factories make the fabric, they make the textiles, they make whatever it might be, the Singer sewing machines, right? And then these small businesses are selling it, and everybody wants it, right? Nobody is saying no thank you to all of these types of inventions and standard of life, quality of life changing inventions that will help out the Americans. This is really, that market revolution is really making a serious change for the middle class. And they're doing well. So it's not bad to live in middle class America in the 1800s. Now, let's say, for example, you don't want to work in a factory and you don't want to have a business. You don't want to be on the docks anymore fishing, right? Like, you're over it. There's something that the United States had that no other nation had at this point in time. We had the West. And so this guy right here, his name's Frederick Turner. He wrote a thesis about the importance of the West in the United States, and he referred to it as our safety valve. It's sort of like, if all else fails, at least you could go out west, right? And in this West, right, it offers opportunities, resources, land, freedom, right? There's a freedom to the West. It doesn't belong to states, right? You're in a territory which offers a little bit more freedom than what you have in the States, right? You have a little bit more say and autonomy if you're living out west, and that's appealing to a lot of people. I don't want to work in the factory anymore, or I don't want to work in the docks, or I don't want to struggle as a middle class farmer, right? I'm going to go out west and I'm going to start anew. It's a struggle, right? It's only for the strong at heart, right? Because you're basically leaving society and starting again. Here, right, he's saying this is our safety valve. If all else fails, right, the West exists. And thanks to that, we're going to continue to develop. America still has a future because of the West. Our other safety valve, aside from the West, is just plain old democracy, right? What we talk about, what we discuss, is all of these changes that are happening in the United States. If you don't like it, you can change it again. You can vote somebody in. You could vote somebody out. You could propose a law, right? These are things that just don't exist in other nations around the world. And we're seeing the effects of that Andrew Jackson democracy really take hold with the common man, and popular elections, and the universal male suffrage. Like, all of that is starting to really just jump into play here, and America's really functioning politically, except for our presidents. Now let's talk about life in the South. So the South is really interesting and unique, right? Because they're just digging into this agrarian lifestyle where the rest of the world is moving away from it. But the thing is, the South produces 75% of the world's cotton. They refer to this crop as king cotton, right? It requires massive amounts of land. It requires a ton of people to work on it, but it's incredibly lucrative, right? Making a lot of money off of cotton, and a lot of countries are exchanging with us. And you'll see most of these cotton plantations are in, like, what we refer to as the deep South or the lower South. And unfortunately, though, as you know, right, we don't have a ton of land in the South, thanks to the Louisiana Purchase, right? If I find Louisiana right there he is, right? And I just go up this way, right? There's no more land here. So that will be a struggle for them, right? They want to expand. They want to stretch out even further so that they can take advantage of the cotton. But the problem is in the South, right? Because they have decided not to industrialize or anything like that. The South is really underdeveloped, like, significantly. There's a lack of roads. There's a lack of canals. There's no, we're starting to build railroads, right? That's not happening in the South. It's a really unique lifestyle, because it's almost as if you jump back in time, right, to the colonial era. And this lack of development, this poor infrastructure, poor development, poor ways of travel, makes the South dependent on the North. So anything that is happening, anything that is occurring in a progressive way is coming from the North. So the Southerners, I mean, they're dependent on the North for these things. So remember, I was talking about that middle class, and we're starting to develop a new quality of life. Well, that comes from a life of progress and industry. And they just don't have that in the South. So this makes almost like a resentment towards the North. If you're living in the South, you feel like you're being taken advantage of by the North. And that's going to lead us to this lifestyle here of Southerners who continue to live a life of, religion and honor, right? The Second Great Awakening, not that that's a bad thing, right? But it makes for a different lifestyle, a different community in the South. So the Second Great Awakening, think of like the Bible Belt, right? Spreads to the South. So that is going to rule over their life. Women were considered to be subordinate to the men. They were seen as if they needed protection, and the men actually felt like, oh, the women need protection. So if the woman needs me to protect her, she needs to listen to me so that I can do that for her. So women had a very different life in the South. In the North, you have women are working, they're working in businesses, they're working in small businesses, they're working in factories, right? There's movement for women a little bit in the North, not in the South. They're going to keep the women in that cult of domesticity so that they can continue holding on to their Southern honor, raising children, working at the home, and being subordinate to their husbands. Now, the men, these Southern gentlemen, are meant to be what they refer to as cavalier. So somebody who's cavalier, right? Somebody who is honorable and brave and strong. Think of like a knight in shining armor. And the men considered themselves to be cavalier. So there's a certain air about them. And they also hated what they referred to as the Northern Yankee. So a Yankee was considered to be, and we know this term, the Yankee, right? We got it in the American Revolution, and we used it as a source of pride when the British were making fun of us and calling us Yankees. But then a Yankee was associated with more of like a business person, somebody who's trying to make money through business and industry. And so a Northern Yankee was given this perspective of like this really dark and scandalous like businessman who's going to take advantage of you at any moment in time. So there makes, like I said, there's this resentment, right? I'm a cavalier, you're a Northern Yankee. And so because of that, there's a competition there that can be felt, not just in economics, but socially as well. There's judgment. Now, not all white Southerners were these cavaliers. Not all these white Southerners were these Southern belles, right? You also have what we refer to as the Yeoman farmer. And a Yeoman farmer is a average Joe farmer who lives off the fat of the land, who has a family that works hard on a smaller plot of land, maybe not cotton, maybe something else, usually did not have slaves. Sometimes they had maybe like one or two slaves, but for the most part, a Yeoman farmer was a farmer who did not own slaves and who was, working their tail off in the land, in the farm, in order to make money, right? So if we think about this, though, the majority of people in the South were yeoman farmers, right? Not everybody had these sprawling plantations. That's actually a very small majority of them. And so the yeoman farmers, this is essentially who Thomas Jefferson was hoping America was going to be like. These yeoman farmers that are just, doing their thing day in, day out, getting their hands dirty. And so they're the ones who were helping to push the economy, especially because the if the cotton plantations, right, the cotton plantations are doing so well, but what else? What else is there, right? You can't eat cotton, right? So how are we going to survive elsewhere? And that's where the Yeoman farmer comes into view. All right, everybody. So that is it for today. Let me know if you have any questions. But otherwise, we'll chat again. Have a good one.